Welcome to the Michigan Man Podcast on Wolverine Sports Radio, a member of the V Sporto Network, and in partnership with SB Nation's Maize and Brew, for Wolverine fans from coast to coast. Go Blue and welcome back to the show. I'm your host, Mike Fitzpatrick. It's August, and that means we're back on our regular weekly schedule. Now, during the season, we'll have 2 shows a week for you. On Tuesdays, our Game Day edition with a Michigan guest, and then our popular visitors show on Thursdays of game week with a play-by-play voice or beat writer covering that week's opposition. This week, though, Steve Lorenz from 247Sports kicks off the month with another recruiting update. First, a few news and notes to get us started. Friday, the team reports for fall camp, and next week, practice begins in earnest. We will be previewing the season in the coming weeks, even if there isn't much news coming out of Fort Schembechler. In reality, it seems though like we've been previewing the upcoming season since last January. So I, for one, am ready to tee it up and to get some game action. It's going to be here soon enough, though. So today we have our last recruiting update until December. Each month, Steve Lorenz from 247Sports joins me to update what's happening on the recruiting scene. As always, we have a lot to talk about. The barbecue at the Big House was last weekend, and some big-time players were in town. Steve Lorenz from 247Sports is up next here on The Michigan Man on Wolverine Sports Radio, a member of the V Sporto Network, and in partnership with SB Nation's Maize and Brew. Back with us on the show as we open the month of August, and of course we know what's going to happen Friday. The team reports for practice, and we'll have enough preview shows in the next couple of weeks. Right now, as usual, we have Steve Lorenz from 247Sports to update us on recruiting. Of course, barbecue in the Big House is over the weekend. Before we touch on that, though, Steve, last week, Stephen Herron Jr. out of Louisville flipped to Stanford. We've been talking about him for a long time. He was a very early verbal. Did that catch you by surprise at all?
Not really. I think that when you're reporting this stuff, you can be in kind of a weird spot because, he had said publicly, I think less than a month before. I think it was at the open. I was at the beginning of the month, actually. Had said he was 100% committed to Michigan publicly. It's one of those things where we had always kind of been told that Stanford was really pushing and that it was a real possibility, and it's like the kid tells you. It's one thing to say it publicly, in today's atmosphere, you're not really, as a prospect, you're not really doing anything wrong by just telling the truth. If you're, there's so many kids that commit somewhere and then are still considering other schools. It's not really a big deal to say so. So from that aspect, it was a little different than usual, but at the end of the day, no, it wasn't really a big surprise. I know Stanford had really, really been recruiting him for a long time, and Michigan's kind of been, they've been still recruiting heavily on the defensive line. I think not necessarily in anticipation, but possibly in anticipation that this was going to come to fruition at some point. So, great athlete. He actually did better at the opening, I think, than people thought he would do. Would have been an interesting fit in the Michigan defense. I think he's a pretty versatile kid. But again, defensive line, one spot where I feel like Michigan's recruiting pretty well right now.
Good for him. When you pick Stanford, you know that academics is at the forefront for you. So, good decision for him. It's a huge decision for a kid, but I don't hate losing out so much to Stanford because it's a good choice.
They're the one school that gets that reaction from Michigan fans. I feel like if you flipped to any other program in the country, there'd be some griping. But yeah, it is. Stanford is the one school where everybody kind of goes, oh, well, it's Stanford. It makes sense in that regard.
Yeah.
And so the interesting dynamic for Michigan to me is, I kind of want to say Michigan. I don't know if we've talked about this before, but with Herron being an example, flipping to Stanford, and then Michigan kind of, let's say, battling Alabama for a Daxton Hill or something, is Michigan's kind of in the middle. They're a great academic school that can compete with the Stanfords and Notre Dames and stuff like that. But then a lot of the kids they'll recruit are those uber academic, like a Stanford type. And then on the other side, they're recruiting against the Alabamas and Georgias and, Florida States of the world a lot of times too. And so that they have a very interesting dynamic compared to most programs. Because I would say even Notre Dame probably doesn't necessarily normally end up against like an Alabama or a Georgia as much as Michigan does. And so Michigan's recruiting dynamic is to me, I think it's one of the most unique in the country because of that idea. Michigan's lost a lot of races to Stanford, and they've lost a lot of races to Alabama and Georgia too, and probably finished second in a ton of those in both fronts. So, Heron kind of another one there. They're battling Stanford for Aeneas DeCosmo too, and so it's they have to be multifaceted in how they pitch and how they pitch to who they're pitching to. So, kind of interesting there, in my opinion.
Well, Steve, the barbecue at the Big House was over the weekend. Some fans say now it's not the event that it used to be years ago. I don't know if it's because of the early signing period, which really just came into effect last year, but still a very important recruiting event.
Yeah, I think so. It's a little different this year than it has been in years past. There's kind of been the scavenger hunt type thing that they would do around campus where the kids it's a game, like a competitive game, also designed to kind of get the kids to experience campus life. This seemed a lot different this year. There were actual, the kids were doing drills and being taught their positions and stuff like that, sitting in the film room. It's a little bit different than what it normally is. I think I would say this year, as far as maybe the kids who came and the kids that they pushed to come, it was much more of a junior day type event than it has been in years past. A lot of times, and I do think the early official visit period has an impact there. They've already gotten a lot of guys up for an official, so there's not the need necessarily to push a upcoming senior to make this visit as there maybe would have been in years past. So I looked at it as more of a junior day with a few top senior targets kind of sprinkled in there. But it's just a little bit different this year than it has been in years past, both in presentation and in my opinion, maybe the impact.
Well, let's talk about some of these kids that were at, most of them I think were at the barbecue at the Big House over the weekend. And start with a kid who's a corner out of Everett, Massachusetts. Not sure how you pronounce his name, Steve. Mike Sanderstil?
Yeah, I think that's pretty much how I pronounce it.
He's still a Vaught Tech commit, though, isn't he?
He is right now. My crystal ball's on Michigan. I don't plan to change it. I think there were expectations that he may have made a switch or flip earlier in the process, but he still hasn't yet. As far as I know, that has nothing to do with where Michigan stands on him. They want him. And also, I would probably label him as an athlete for them, cornerback, but also like a slot wide receiver, which they'd like to take a couple in this cycle. So, again, not just saying this because we cover Michigan. Another kid, I watch his film. I think he's probably underrated. I think his film really jumps out. Very explosive, athletic guy. Michigan really liked him. I think they offered him before Louis Cine, who is his former high school teammate, the top 50 kid who's now playing in Texas. So, Michigan's liked him for a while, and they'll keep working him.
Another wideout that we like is Quintel Kent. He's 6 foot, 170 pounds, out of Lakewood, Ohio, St. Edwards. He's received several crystal ball predictions as a Michigan lead, Steve. Is that still the case?
I think they got George Johnson already in the fold. They like Sainer still. I think, you have Kyle Ford, Cornelius Johnson out there as guys. I would probably consider Kent more of a wait and see type prospect at this point. I know the crystal balls are up there. I haven't put one in yet. So that's probably where they're at with him. Good prospect though. I mean, it's definitely not a name to forget, because they're not a shoo-in for any of the guys that they named, probably outside of Sainer still. So yeah, I would probably put him in that camp right now.
Well, another interesting player is Mike Morris, a 6'5", 255-pound, four-star defensive end. He's from Delray Beach, Florida. Committed to Florida State right now, and I think he's a legacy at Florida State, isn't he?
Correct. I think Michigan, that's the one that I put in a crystal ball for over the weekend. I think Michigan's kind of quietly been around in that one. Really, it's been, the list of guys they're still recruiting at defensive end has been long and usually and full of elite guys, so it's been one of those things where it's, they have room, do they not? I don't think Herron decommitting necessarily changes it too much with Morris necessarily. They're different type of prospect. But I do think Michigan's in pretty good shape there. The one thing, and I did put in the crystal ball, he's been very glowing to Miami and Tennessee staffs as well. So depending on what his timeline is, it could become an interesting one. But as things stand today, I think Michigan in pretty good shape there probably.
And it sounds like his dad came not expecting to like Jim Harbaugh and left town liking Jim Harbaugh, so that always helps too.
Yeah, it's amazing when people turn off the TV and actually meet some of these guys that they're not the same as they're portrayed by the national media. So, and I feel like with Harbaugh, I get that. I mean, pretty much every kid who's never met him before is always surprised and it's because of the way he's kind of portrayed.
Mm-hmm.
Whether it be by ESPN or whoever, as however they, describe him or whatever, but it's always, he wasn't what I expected. He's a family guy, really serious, it's it's kind of who he is, and so, he's got his quirks, but, it's never surprising to me to hear that when somebody's didn't know what to expect and then they come away pleasantly surprises them, because it's been that way pretty much since he got hired.
Well, another kid in the process we've talked about for a while is Isaiah Foskey. Big kid, 6'5", 240-pound tight end out of a great high school program, Concord de La Salle in California. He was supposed to come in and also, I think, pay a visit to Notre Dame over the weekend, wasn't he, Steve?
Yep. He saw both schools. With him, I mean, this one's a really interesting one. I don't think anybody knows where he's really leaning right now. I would have guessed Clemson earlier. He did go on an ACC swing of sorts in the spring. I know he loved Clemson, but they're full at tight end, so that they're probably not really an option. And with Michigan, I mean, they have Eric All. I think Foskey's the one guy they would take as a compliment there, but I don't think they're going to reach for a tight end. And he's in no hurry, at all still. He's in a very slow mode right now recruiting-wise. And sometimes with those kind of guys, it just eventually sort of fades away. So that one will be interesting to me. He's got all the Pac-12 offers, but there just hasn't been a lot of buzz about where or who is really standing out, So I know he really liked that Notre Dame too. Great kid. Spent some time with Mustafa Muhammad while he was on campus. And so, yeah, going to be one of the more interesting ones, really, and kind of ironically is one of the first kids of that cycle that I covered. Had a good relationship with him for a long time, and is just seems to be very deliberate and very thorough in how he's going about things.
Ohio State's big on him too, aren't they?
I think so, but they just took a tight end out of Tennessee. I don't know what their tight end situation is right now. They also liked a kid named Brenton Strange out of West Virginia, who I think Michigan may have gone ahead and offered if they hadn't gotten Eric All. But, I don't know what their numbers are either. I know he's been to Ohio State, and he's been to Penn State too. Penn State probably a school I wouldn't count out either, actually, provided they're still pursuing him. But again, he's got UCLA. It won't be USC. They've got one. I think they're about to get a second. And I believe he's got Washington too. It could be one of those deals where nobody knows where he ends up, and then he just ends up staying really close to home, like most people would have guessed, I guess. But it's really, in this day and age, it's interesting especially because he does do interviews too. He's not one of those quiet kids that won't pick up the phone or won't respond. So he's a very rare kid in that idea that he will speak publicly, but nobody really knows what he's kind of thinking and stuff. So pretty cool. I always kind of like that.
Well, another interesting player is from Morrow, Georgia, safety Jamal Hill, and there we go, in the Peach State again. 6'2", 190, We offered him in June. I think shortly thereafter, Bama came calling, but he would be another nice get from SEC country, Steve, wouldn't he?
Yeah, he's another one that I think is probably a 4-star level prospect. I'm actually a little surprised that we didn't bump him up in our last update. I know he had been explicitly mentioned as a big-time sleeper candidate by our national team. And really, like I said, you talk about Louis Cine, who has kind of been a top target for them for a while.
Mm-hmm.
I don't see much optimism on that front right now, and I know they'd like to take 2. So I could see Hill really being a guy that moves way up the board very quickly. Really a dynamic, good size, brings some elite athleticism to the table too. Really, again, like I said, I think a guy is a 4-star prospect. So in Michigan, they've attacked Georgia hard. They've also, in my opinion, in most cases, picked and chosen kind of the right under the radar guys to go after as well. Like the Michael Barrett type kids that are completely going to outdo their recruiting ranking. So and I think Hill would be a guy somewhat in line with that. I mean, I feel stronger about Barrett just because I think he's going to be a stud, but Hill is a guy I think would outdo his recruiting ranking as well.
Well, another interesting player I've been hearing a lot about lately is Josh Sanguinetti, 6'2", 175-pound free safety. He's from University School in Fort Lauderdale. I think he too is considered right now, though, a Miami lean, isn't he, Steve?
Well, I think Miami's kind of filling up at their defensive back spots. Sanguinetti, another really, they hosted a lot of interesting kids this week. He was a top 100 prospect when we first released our 2019 rankings, which was, 10 years ago at this point, but has fallen kind of steadily, struggled at the opening too. There were rumors he's been fighting injuries and stuff. I don't know the validity of all that. But I do know Michigan, he's an option for Michigan. Nebraska's in there too. I think Tennessee. I'm not so sure about Miami, though. That's a crystal ball that I think will change as the process goes forward. Michigan likes him at cornerback too. I think he's listed as a safety on our site. I believe they prefer him at cornerback. So again, much like Foskey, but in a different way, it's a very interesting recruitment to me. He's another guy that says he's going to wait. I don't know per se if he'll have the luxury of waiting on a lot of the schools that he's considering. So it'll be really interesting, again, to kind of see where that one ends up. Still like a top 150 guy in the composite, I believe, but our guys are pretty adamant about where they have him ranked. I think he's an 88 or an 89 on our site.
Well, any other 2019 kids in for the barbecue we haven't mentioned that Michigan is still in on, Steve?
Yeah, the big one would probably be a kid named Bryce Benhart, top 100 offensive tackle out of Minnesota. A guy I think is right up there with Trevor Keegan and Danielson, Ike or Ike, or I don't really know yet. Those 3 guys I think are the guys they've really honed in on that offensive tackle. If I was to guess, and again, this isn't, I think all 3 guys are going to be very good college prospects. I actually think that Benhart is the guy that they would prefer. Mm-hmm. I think he's the one with the highest ceiling. I think he's the best potential college player. I know Alan True, our regional guy, has been adamant that Michigan has a shot in this one. His family has approached the recruiting process very literally, in the idea that if they take a visit to a program, they're very serious about it. They don't really waste their time and just take visits to take visits. So, but again, at the flip side, that's a kid, kind of your classic. You're not going to get a reaction. You're not going to find quotes. It'd be very rare to get any direct intel on that recruitment. So that one's kind of, we'll have to wait and see. Keegan seems to be slowing things down a little bit. Ike was on Alabama's campus last weekend with Michigan armbands on. He had a picture with Nick Saban and had Michigan armbands on both arms, so that's kind of interesting. But either way, though, the thing is I think they're shaping up to reel in one of these 3 tackles, and I think any of those 3 guys would be a nice finish to an offensive line class that I get the impression that the staff is just loving the more that they get to know these kids, and just, Trent Jones was our Rusty Mansell, our main Georgia insider, went out to Grayson for a practice, and Trent Jones won the Alpha Dog Award at that practice. And for people that don't know, Grayson probably has about 15 D1 kids on their roster alone, with multiple offensive linemen with D1 offers, including Wanya Morris as a 5-star on our site. And Jones looked the best in pads, which is something I've been saying pretty much since he committed. So add that in with the guys there, the Rumblers and the Carpenters and the Barnharts and Jack Stewart. I think they're really setting up for a epic or very, very nice offensive line haul this cycle.
Well, Steve, do we expect more verbals to the class of 2019 in the coming weeks before this season, not only the college season, but the high school season gets underway? Or is it going to slow down now until December and the traditional signing day in February?
I think there's always a possibility. Saner's still kind of a guy that we've been keeping an eye on. Besides that, though, the timelines do seem to be slowing down. I just saw an article, like a local news article last night, that Zach Harrison is slowing his process down, which in my opinion is actually a great thing for Michigan. So I think when the dead period about to hit, I think you're going to see kids without no contact, all that type of thing. You're going to see one of two things. You'll either see some of the kids that'll finish with the whole, I want to focus on my senior season, so I'm going to commit, or I want to focus on my senior season, so I'm going to commit late and after. And with a lot of these elite guys, they always seem to err on the side of caution and wait until after. So, because for a while, like a Keegan, Daxton Hill, Harrison, all were guys I think originally planned to commit sometime in August. And don't know if that's going to be the case anymore.
With us on our game day segment this week, as we do our monthly update to start the month of August, is Steve Lorenz from 247 Sports. Steve, 8 class of 2020 recruits I think that was the number, that are ranked very highly by 247 Sports. We're at the barbecue. Let's run down some of those names. You can add any that I'm missing here and get your thoughts on our chances with them. Let's start with Elias Ricks. He's a corner from another very good high school program, Santa Ana Mater Dei.
I like either USC or Ohio State there, to be honest with you. Probably had a good visit to Michigan, but just honestly, sometimes you can just tell with the kids' social media activity what schools they like more than the others, and I definitely feel like Ohio State or USC. Mater Dei, really kind of the new USC feeder school that Sarah, Long Beach Poly, those programs have been for a long time. I feel like Mater Dei is kind of next in line there. So I'd probably put a crystal ball on USC if I were going to put one in today. But the other school appears to be Ohio State. It sounds like you had a great visit there.
Well, we're also in on a big offensive tackle, Kevin Pine from Mills, Massachusetts. Any lean for him?
So Pine didn't make it. He was on a family vacation. But I think Notre Dame, Michigan, I think he's a legit academic kid. I assume Stanford, they just always, and he's an excellent prospect. I can't imagine Stanford's not going to offer him at some point. So, Notre Dame, Michigan, I believe he has family, perhaps even his dad played for Virginia Tech. I don't know if that will factor in at all or not. He's been there. He's visited. But he's also visited Michigan before. Massachusetts kid, so Don Brown is like best friends with the high school coach, as he seems to be with every high school coach at a Massachusetts school that Michigan's recruiting somebody. So it's definitely going to give him a shot. I know his coach told me that he's looking to get up for a game this season. So Notre Dame, Michigan, probably to start out there. But I feel like that one, I don't know, maybe it'll take a while. I guess I don't really know. I mean, sometimes these kids maybe decide to end it a little earlier. Some go later. With him, I think it's kind of a up in the air thing with him.
Another Massachusetts kid that was supposed to be there was Khalil Mullings from Boston Milton Academy.
Yep, Mullings. So it was kind of funny. Michigan offered him a long time ago. They've been recruiting the heck out of him. He decided to visit Notre Dame and Ohio State before he went to the barbecue. and I correctly predicted that both schools would offer him. And then he headed up to Michigan. I would say Michigan. My crystal ball's on Michigan. I think Penn State, probably the other school there that he's really kind of built a bond with. I think Michigan again. I mean, he was a satellite camp kid before he was ever ranked or rated or anything. And Michigan has made him a pretty big priority in that cycle. So, kind of a guy. I guess with the early effort they've put in, I think it'd be somewhat of a disappointment if they lost out, because Penn State was there relatively early too, not as early as Michigan, but if like Notre Dame or Ohio State was to sneak in, I think that'd be kind of a disappointment, as considering I believe he visited both schools previously, didn't get an offer. So, I think that's a guy I would say Michigan's in pretty decent shape with right now.
These next 5 kids are in-state, which you always like to see, and one of them is Port Huron defensive end Braden McGregor, who I've been hearing a lot about lately. What do you think about him?
I think he'll be a 4-star when we release our 2020 updates are coming out pretty soon. I suspect he'll be a 4-star prospect when that comes out. I mean, no guarantee, but I really like him. I think he's a great fit in the Michigan defense. And I think he's another guy I think they're in pretty good shape with. The other school I'd probably watch out for there is Notre Dame. He's been up there a couple times. And, those are the 2 schools, in my opinion, right there that probably stand out. But again, I have a crystal ball in on Michigan there too, and would be a great addition. Kind of a guy I think will keep rising in the rankings. Port Huron, not really a place that a lot of people are going up to watch prospects play, right? So those are the kind of guys that have to earn it in camp performances and off of maybe word of mouth from college staffs. I know Michigan's really, really high on him.
Well, another 2 kids out of a great program here in state, East Kentwood. Teammates Brian Mostella, he's a defensive lineman, and offensive lineman Dallas Fincher. What do you think of those guys?
Fincher's a Michigan State legacy, so I think I have a crystal ball in for the Spartans on that one. Mostella, Michigan, crystal ball there too. Pretty decent in-state class in 2020. I think there's a lot of guys that'll rise up. I think Mostella's just outside of the top 247, or he might just be inside. He's right there on the edge. Is a guy I think will rise too. Really high ceiling guy. I think with both him and McGregor, I think if Michigan in a perfect world would have waited a little bit longer, but I just think the film and the potential for both those guys was that they needed to get in early and offer early and make them a priority right away. And so, I have Michigan crystal ball in for both those guys right now. And Mostella, I believe his family, I think they're pretty big Michigan fans too. He's been up there at least 3 times. And, I think they've done a really good job in that one too.
Well, those of us who live downriver Detroit know it's been quite a while. Back in the day, in the 70s and the 60s, a lot of players used to go to Michigan or be recruited to Michigan from downriver. You don't hear much anymore, but right now a player we hear awful lot about down here is Ian Stewart from Gibraltar Carlson. So what's your take on him?
So Ian's kind of been on the radar for a while, not as like a guy picking up big offers, but as a guy that had the potential to. And obviously Michigan came through, I think it was last month, when they offered a few 2020s in state during the camp session. And as a guy, I would venture to say, as things stand right now, probably a Michigan lean. There's a few of these guys, though, this cycle. I think DeVell Washington out of Bay City, another guy who, I think both of those guys have the potential to kind of take off from a national standpoint. The guys that haven't, Rayshawn Williams at King kind of has already. So, but with Washington and Ian, I think there's definitely real potential for them to take off as far as national type prospects. So when that happens, you never really know. But Stewart, a guy, again, I think as things stand today, I would probably lean Michigan for him.
Well, you just mentioned DeVell Washington. He's out of Bay City Central. I haven't seen much tape on him, but I remember the story when Michigan offered. He was more than a little bit thrilled, wasn't he?
Yeah, but the ironic part, so he's another kid. So Ohio State is offered there. I actually think he's an Ohio State lean. The question is, I don't know what Ohio State's receiver board looks like in 2020. So, because to be honest with you, I kind of think Ohio State probably leads for Rayshon Williams too, out of King. So, I don't know if those are two guys that they would take both or what the deal would be there. But yeah, I mean, Washington, I think it'd be Michigan or Ohio State, but if I was a betting person, I would say I would probably lean Buckeyes for him right now, and probably the same for Williams, to be honest.
Well, boo to that, but yeah, there's a big decision.
Well, some of these kids love it's just the presentation of these two schools is just so much different, and so you're going to get such different reactions from each of these schools, and just that's why I feel like a lot of times, they really, to be 100%, I just don't feel like that they've matched up a ton. I mean, considering as bitter rivals as they are and as close geographically as they are, they really haven't gone head to head for a ton of guys. I mean, there's always going to be a share, but it usually kind of feels like it's one or the other, and it's just it's interesting. But I feel pretty strongly about Williams for sure. But with Washington, I get the impression that it's Ohio State too. Again, for whatever reason, I don't know what they're doing that Michigan's not. I mean, I don't know if it is the wins that really are what kind of tip the scales in some of these situations. I tend to think not, though, just because it is so early for these kids in their recruitments that it's these kids have 2 more years of games still technically. Michigan could win the next 2 against Ohio State, for all we know. And so, it's definitely interesting. Ohio State does a good job of getting in very early. I mean, they offered Rayshon Williams before Michigan did. So, they get props they've done a good job of identifying and offering some guys in state pretty early. And I think that puts Michigan in a position to kind of respond and then kind of go above and beyond. It really, if anything, it's partially designed to make them work harder for their in-state guys, because Ohio State's not going to really harm themselves too much if they like a kid at a school and then maybe they back off as much as Michigan is because it's the in-state school, and so there's less harm for Ohio State to offer a kid really early and think, oh, well, we already got 2 receivers. We don't think we're going to take a third, sorry. But with Michigan, if they offer a kid, I just feel like they're held, as they probably should be, are held to a little bit of a different standard by in-state coaches and programs and stuff with that type of stuff.
A few years ago, Urban Meyer ticked off some folks when he said the Big Ten needed to up its game on the recruiting trail. And, not that I want to give him any credit, but I think we're doing that, Steve. It seems to be this could be the second pretty darn good year in a row for the Big Ten as a whole.
Yeah, I agree. Obviously, Ohio State kind of has always, ranking and rating-wise, has always brought in the best classes. I think Penn State has moved way up as well. I think James Franklin reminds me, kind of gives me a Brady Hoke vibe, strictly in the way he recruits. As far as what Hoke was so good at was making a legitimate connection with the kids and their families, making them feel welcome and comfortable on campus. With Hoke, it was their calling card as a staff. And I think Penn State does a pretty good job of doing something pretty similar. And then, I think Nebraska will see an uptick under Scott Frost. And the one school that is really recruiting well this cycle, in my opinion, is Purdue. They've reeled in a lot of really good players. Matter of fact, they just got at least one last night. I think they might have gotten 2. No, they did. They got 2 4-stars yesterday, which, with Purdue is probably more than they had 5 years previous combined. And that's, they got Marvin Grant out of Detroit King, who is a guy that Michigan had offered but kind of cooled on, but is a guy, in my opinion, I think is going to be really good. I think it's a guy Michigan maybe should have circled back on, to be honest with you. And, and then also they're really in the race for Wan'Dale Robinson, a player that Michigan is recruiting. They're in it for David Bell, top 100 kid out of Indiana. And then they have the big fish, George Karlaftis, who we've talked about before, is right now he's a top 10 overall player in the country. And so, Brome's doing some really good things there. I think they're kind of in a weird spot, though. If they win, let's say they win 10 games, I don't think they will, but let's just say they have a big season, you know, whatever big program fires their head coach is going to be throwing the bank at him to bring him in, especially to win big at a school like Purdue so quickly. And then if they lose, if they struggle, which they do have a pretty tough schedule, then it's kind of that whole, we want to latch on, you know, like with a Karlaftis, for instance, you know, like Michigan's going to be on him until the end, just because you can't not be for a kid of that caliber. And so will a lot of these other prospects. Will have other suitors coming by, and you see it every year with a lot of other programs. You know, they get a good start to the class and they struggle on the field, and then it kind of falls apart a little bit. So, you know, it's like if you're a Purdue fan, you almost want them to kind of go like 7-5 or like 8-4, to where it's like he could say, hey, progress is being made here, but then nobody's going to try to poach him away at the end of the season, you know? So, but yeah, the recruiting profile of the Big Ten has definitely gone up. It's always going to be an uphill battle, just because the major hotbed states in the country are all within other conferences. You know, the Pac-12 has California, the Big 12 has Texas, the SEC has Georgia and Florida. So, you know, it's going to be difficult from that aspect for the mid to lower tier teams. But I think that a lot of those mid to lower tier teams are doing a better job this cycle of bringing in some guys.
Well, final question for you, Steve. As we mentioned at the top of the interview, this is the first show of August. Friday is August the 3rd, and the team is going to report. So at this point, and we're going to be previewed out, as we all know, in the next 3 weeks, but at this point, are you optimistic, despite what is just such a brutal schedule, that this team is going to compete for the East Division title?
Yeah, I am. You know, any other team in the country that brings back 17 starters should be like given a fair shake, should be given a chance to, and then let alone a major upgrade at the position that, in my opinion, cost them 3 or 4 games last year at quarterback. You know, offensively is obviously where all the questions are going to be. I think history says that second-year wide receivers produce at a much higher level than first-year wide receivers. I think you take that into account. I think you take the 3 things I look at are this. I look at that. I look at a progression at the wide receiver position, and I look at 2 big upgrades with Patterson at quarterback and then with Ed Warner coaching the offensive line. You know, the thing is with Michigan, their offense doesn't have to score 40 points to win football games. And so, you know, even just efficiency offensively it will give them a chance to contend, in my opinion. And then, so yeah, absolutely. I know it's a tough schedule. That's kind of the thing, is like, how long has it been since they've won a big road game? Well, they're going to have to probably win at least 2 of 3 to have a chance. Well, you could maybe even throw Northwestern in there technically, you know, for 4. You know, to have a chance at the division, you know, but I definitely think that there's a real shot there. And that's all like fact-based to me. I don't think it's, I mean, there's some opinion, some take type aspect in that, but again, you just have to kind of look at it logically. How close were they to winning the games that they lost last year with their 3rd best quarterback on their roster? I mean, I go back to the Michigan State game. You know, State has squeaked by Michigan in both of D'Antonio's wins over Harbaugh. You know, for Michigan to have a -5 turnover margin and still have about 6 chances to win the game in the 6 drives to win the game in the 4th quarter, I think says to me that, you know, that they're close, that they're on the verge. You know, because I look back, you know, I look at Michigan State, Ohio State last year and think that if those were Brady Hoke or Rich Rodriguez coach teams, Michigan would have gotten destroyed in both those games. And so, you know, so yeah, I think things are coming together. I think the upgrade, like I said, the upgrade at quarterback, the progression at wide receiver, and Ed Warner's addition, I think are going to make the Michigan offense good enough to win them, to allow their defense to breathe for a second, and to win them a few games that they wouldn't have won last year.
Well, with previews in the next few weeks, we're going to talk an awful lot about all these things. And then, of course, the season is starting in really 4 weeks. So it might be a while before we get you back, Steve, but rest assured, we look forward to the next update. The recruiting world just keeps going. So, thanks again, as always, for being so generous with your time. My listeners just can't get enough of recruiting talk with you, Steve. So, again, thanks for your time, and we look forward to the next visit.
Appreciate it, Mike.
Quick Hits is next as we wrap it up for another week here on The Michigan Man on Wolverine Sports Radio, a member of the V Sporto Network, and in partnership with SB Nation's Maize and Brew. On Quick Hits today, thanks to Steve Lorenz for being with us. Steve is, in my humble opinion, the best recruiting writer in the biz. Judging from your email and comments, most of you agree with that. He is with us monthly from January until August, and we take a break from recruiting news during the season. He'll be back, though, with us in December with news from the early signing period. In other news today, Kareem Walker has left the program, and he's going to be playing JC ball in Kansas. This had long been rumored, but Kareem tweeted the news over the weekend confirming his move. Coach Barnes Arico has a 2-year extension of her contract that pays out over $700,000 a year. Well-deserved, I might add. She is the winningest coach in program history and has a young and talented team ready to roll this season. Hopefully she's going to be around for a long time. Good news for hockey. Quinn Hughes is coming back for his sophomore season. He was chosen 7th in the first round of the recent NHL draft. Quinn said he wanted to come back and win a national championship, and he loved his teammates and the coaching staff. Coach Pearson was, of course, thrilled, as we all should be. It should be another great season of Michigan hockey. Next week, I'll have the first of our preview shows. Beat writer Nick Baumgardner from the Detroit Free Press is scheduled to join us. If he's tied up, and these folks are really busy this time of the year, we'll have another of our beat writers with us. With the season just around the corner, make sure you have our free show app from the iTunes or Google Play stores. You can also hear us on iHeart, Stitcher, TuneIn, Spotify, and Wolverine Sports Radio. So get one of those apps and be ready to roll. The season's right around the corner. That does it for another week. We'll see you back here next week as we begin our series of season previews. Until then, I'm your host, Mike Fitzpatrick. Have a great Wolverine week, everyone. Enjoy what's left of summer, take care, and as always, go blue. Thanks for joining us today on The Michigan Man, here on Wolverine Sports Radio, a member of the V Sporto Network, and in partnership with SB Nation's Maize and Brew. Our listener lines are open 24/7 for your calls at 313-263-4842. That's 313-263-4842. Or email us at themichiganmanpodcast@yahoo.com. That's themichiganmanpodcast@yahoo.com. The Michigan Man Podcast is produced at the studios of Robin Lynn Productions, Allen Park, Michigan, and is not affiliated with the University of Michigan. Go Blue!